programs that we would have every year. Eventually, of course, you can get, well, we'll raise taxes. Okay, so that's the dilemma. And I think, who put that in? I think there are differing opinions on how much debt we should have and what we should go in debt for. You, as voters in the future, got to decide. What do you favor? You could certainly, I think, if you think critically, say there's a limit because certain really bad things happen if you go so far. But also there's things that make it, that are worthwhile to spend on a debt, spend debt for. Anybody else got any comments on that? Yeah.
Personally, I think that it's all about careful investing, which is, like you said, going into debt sometimes is acceptable. However, overall, we should not go into debt. We should avoid it and keep a balanced budget most of the time.
Yeah. And it's a lot of people will argue that we should always have a, yeah.
Did the House and Senate ever come to an agreement and raise the ceiling?
They did agree to raise the debt ceiling. It was a very tough negotiation between the leader of the House of Representatives and the president, but they did agree. And there were some compromises. A good idea of when there's been a good compromise is when the radicals on the left and the radicals on the, I shouldn't use the word radical. The people on the far left or the far right are unhappy. You can't make everybody happy. There's 350 million people in this country. You can't make everybody happy. You can't have something that makes all aspects, all portions of both parties happy. So yeah, there was a compromise and they raised the debt. Any other comments on the debt?
What would happen if we want to pass the debt ceiling?
Probably not as catastrophic as what you read in the newspaper. There are various things, as I understand it, and I'm not an expert in finance. However, I went to the University of Chicago, if you know anything about that, they're pretty good on economics. There are various little things they can pull and do, and it would force the politicians to come to some kind of compromise. But you really don't want to get to that. That just causes everybody to panic. Yes, sir?
What is your stance on raising the debt ceiling? Like, are you for it or against it?
My answer to that would be it depends on what we're raising it for. And I really don't want to get any deeper than that. We could talk about that forever. Anything else besides debt you want to talk about? Well, what else do you want to talk about besides debt? Huh? Sir?
Aid to Ukraine.
What?
Aid to Ukraine.
Oh, aid to Ukraine. What do you think about aid to Ukraine?
I think we should keep sending aid to Ukraine because we were in a position, we were fighting the British, the French and the Spanish gave us.
I love that. He gave reasons why he believes it. Because they're doing what we did when we fought the British. And the people who favor what we've done, and by the way, it's almost unanimous among our government officials on both parties, on all sides, that we should have, what we've done to fund Ukraine is right. Okay, yeah.
What's your name?
Wait.
Wait, okay. I personally respectfully disagree. Like, I'm pretty sure that, yeah, I mean, maybe a lesser amount. I 100% agree that we should still help the country that's for need of it. But on the other hand, don't we as a country itself are already in trouble with situation as it is?
Are we what?
Like, we're already in conflict, so conflicted inside due to our financial situations, hard to buy, for example.
Okay, the comment is we're already have such a problem in our own finances, maybe we should do less or at least limit. Let's get some other people that haven't commented. Yeah. You.
Okay. I disagree with Wayne too, because Ukraine itself has a very questionable leadership, very extremist in my opinion, but also it has some military sections that are very morally incorrect, because they follow beliefs that are very controversial this day, even in America. So I don't think we should send money to them specifically for some of the sections of the structure government that are morally wrong.
Okay, Ukraine has some problems in its own government, and for that reason, you don't think we should send, you think we should quit, stop sending everything, or no more, or what?
No, just maybe like a civil help, but not like military help. Like maybe refugees could come to the country, something like that. But I don't think military wise we should help them.
okay? You got two guys right next to you. What do you think?
I think that we should help Ukraine. I mean, if we let Russia take over, then that's just another democracy gone. And I mean, like, they have problems in their government, we have problems in our government. Like, Kevin McCarthy is being held hostage by like the radical or the far right. Like, our
Now we know where you stand.
but like the Ukrainian government has its problems, but if we just let like annexation of Ukraine happen, like that's a democracy in Eastern Europe that's just gone.
Yes.
Now, I respectfully disagree. There is war maps where they've drawn where they would stop, and I do wish they would stop sending money out, as we have our own issues of veterans on the streets, and it's like people saying like, we send guns over there for the civilians to protect themselves. Why can't we own guns to protect ourselves here in the United States? We're basically doing a Cuba 2.0 to
Good
Russia.
God, Ukraine's a popular topic. Some of that, okay.
I respectfully disagree with the notion that we should stop or even reduce aid. In fact, we should ramp up aid, especially military aid. Every bit of military aid we have sent to them is not even a cost. We mark it down as a cost. However, we're sending equipment which we have had in stockpile. It costs us money to maintain it. So we are getting rid of that cost on us, and we are helping a democracy. And I'm mentioning the fact that this is a very rare opportunity where we might be able to completely eliminate a geopolitical threat to us. There has not exactly been another instance where there's been no near-peer conflict in Europe since World War II, and this represents an opportunity to cripple Russia and remove them as a threat.
I want to take three more on this, and then I want to ask you a question.
Kind of back into that like historical context, and especially World War II. If we think about it, when the United States dropped the atomic bomb on Japan, that wasn't meant to just subdue the Japanese army. It was also meant to intimidate the rising Soviet power. And I know it's not an existing power now, but that's what the president of Russia is. Like, he's just a very sympathetic man to the Soviet Union, and that's his, I believe, if I understand correctly, that's his goal with trying to annex those locations in Ukraine. So I just believe, like, I don't understand what the morality of Ukraine, but at least in terms of, you know, perhaps just maybe calming that sort of rising power, it just might be beneficial if we keep sending aid to Ukraine.
Okay.
I think the most beneficial thing for America
Nice and line now, so
I think the most beneficial thing for America is to aid Ukraine just enough to draw out the war as long as you can, to keep Russia from the war, to keep moving pressure out, to take away the supplies.
use it as a way to please Russia.
Yes.
All right, one more. We could go on forever, guys, but I do want to get to some other things. You haven't said anything, I don't believe.
I have two things. One, economically speaking, by bleeding Russia dry now, that means that because Russia and China are our two biggest threats, so when we divide the military budget in an assessment of which countries pose the greatest threats, Russia and China are the majority of our budget. So by depleting their military now, they become less of a threat. So we won't have to spend as much spending on them in the future. And then also with that, it's the United States' fault that Ukraine is in this situation due to the fact that at the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine was responsible for 1/3 of the Soviets' nuclear arsenal. Then the United States signed a treaty saying, give us the nukes that are in your possession, and we will defend you if Russia invades. So we have an obligation to be there and continue supporting them, because it's our fault that Russia invaded them. Because if they still had those nukes, Russia wouldn't have invaded.
Okay, all right. I really appreciate you guys have given a lot of thoughtful comments and a lot of comments where you explain why you feel. Now, there's disagreement in here. Hell, welcome to the United States of America and the human race. There will always be disagreement. But if you'll do the critical thinking, you know, we can disagree without being disagreeable. Let me throw a question at you. What do you think would happen if Ukraine loses and Russia takes over?
So I think that if Russia takes over Ukraine, it's another step in Russia's reunification of the USSR. Putin has been known to say that the fall of the USSR was the greatest tragedy
human history. And so you got to prevent Russia from achieving their political objective. Help keeping Ukraine alive helps dry Russia out. But at the same time, Ukraine is a proxy battle for what China sees what they're going to do to Taiwan.
Okay.
And if we fail to defend Ukraine, that sends a message to all of our geopolitical allies that we might not defend Taiwan. And that gives China the go-ahead to invade Taiwan.
All right.
Precedents.
I'm sorry, it went right on my head. I'm trying to think again. You said it's a proxy battle and it sends a message to China that will do something. And you also, what's the first thing? The Russian czar. You want to read something interesting sometimes, guys? Read about the czars in Russia, which was right through the 1800s. Well, actually, Romanov was overthrown in the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. So Russia was a huge empire, and Putin has said he wants to reestablish that empire.
Yeah, personally, I do see that as part of Putin's plan, really, as restoring the Russian Empire in its standing in where it stood in the world. Not simply the Russian Empire, but whatever Russian state that he's seeking to achieve here. Putin is aging, so I really doubt that much would come of a fall in Ukraine in terms of that kind of continued aggression, because, well, one, Putin's growing weak and old and he's gonna die soon. And I really don't think that his replacement is gonna be anywhere near as forceful as he is, concerning his background as a KGB agent. He as a personality is very much more domineering compared to many other Russian politicians.
Okay. Yeah. You.
Personally, I think it would be, I do agree with the friend of the yes, it would send a message to China. If Russia can do this with Ukraine, they can do that with Taiwan. But I also think it would be more of a factor to main Europe. If the Russians can do this with Ukraine, what's stopping them from doing that with us?
Somebody said earlier that they probably should stay in Ukraine because to bleed Russia. Has anybody ever done that before in the U.S.? Any president? Bleed Russia?
Yes.
Who?
It was Reagan, I believe.
Reagan. Absolutely. Yeah. When the Russians were saying, we're going to bury you, Reagan just quietly said, no, you're not, because your economy can't do it. We're going to spend you right in the ground. We're going to build up our military to the point where you are nothing anymore. And that's exactly, they tried to keep up, and it bankrupted their economy, and that's why in 1990, communism fell in Russia, and they gradually transformed to mostly a market economy. By the way, I was there about 10 years ago, and the transformation to a market economy made tremendous differences in that country. Of course, now they're going back in the other direction. How about something else? What if, right now the American people, polls say the American people are very much behind the money that we spend in the Ukraine. President Biden is clearly behind it. Congress has definitely supported all of the requests that he has made. What if the American public turned around and said, we want out of there? What should the politicians do?
Well, they're supposed to represent the people, right? So I mean, they would have to stop eventually, otherwise they would not get reelected.
Well, that's a very good point. If eventually they ignore the wishes of enough people, they won't get reelected. Now, are you a politician or a statesman? Do you want to be reelected only, no matter what?
If you're a politician, probably, yeah.
That's basically what it eventually. Yes, our politicians are elected representatives. They are elected, but remember, to represent us, not simply do just whatever we said. They're supposed to be the intelligent leaders to lead us in the right direction. What's the difference between this, a democracy, and a republic, and which one are we?
Republic.
Well, okay, what's the difference?
The democracy.
You can have both. You can have
Democracy,
both.
We're democratic.
Okay, but in a democracy, it's ruled by the people, majority. Now that sounds pretty good, doesn't it?
No.
It ain't so good if you happen to be the minority, and what if you're the minority by one? The other side gets all their way. We're not that, we're a republic. We elect representatives, and supposedly the best and brightest, to represent us and make judgments. Now, I suppose sometime in the future, we could get to a point where everybody's got on their little smartphone and computer, we could put every issue, and the whole American public could vote on everything. That's a scary thought. That's a scary thought. All right, what else? So,
Well, if, I'm not necessarily saying I agree with this, but if they did
you
this.
better be able to defend it then.
Well, I know, what I'm saying though is, like, if they decided to, stop funding Ukraine, and the war, I feel like an option could possibly be to try and, stop the, Russia's, pursuit into, Ukraine, and maybe they get to keep the land they've taken. I don't think Ukraine would like that very much, but at least it would end the war while also appealing to Americans' interests of, not spending hundreds of billions of
Okay,
dollars.
if the American people decided we shouldn't spend any money, you're saying, well, maybe we'll let Russia just keep what they've got so far.
And try and figure out a way to end that ongoing war in the best way possible.
What do you think Russia would do in those circumstances?
Agree. Agree.
They would.
I don't know if they would or not.
Okay, can't listen to 14 people at once. What do you think?
I think that they would take the treaty, and then 5 years later, whenever they're built back up, they just declare war on them again.
Okay.
Well, that is,
It ain't about my opinions, but I do agree with you. I mean, they already did this once. They're in violation of all kinds of international treaties because they came and took territory away from a sovereign nation. So why would Putin stop again, particularly as someone down here said, he's declared that he would love to recreate the Russian Empire. All right.
Also say that policy is appeasement. If they did it once, what's to stop them from doing it again? It's just what Hitler did in Europe, so we have to learn
Well,
from the past. Well, what?
It wasn't.
Yeah, Speaker,
Hitler didn't do it.
Max, okay, go ahead, please.
Say if we kept moving, we'd have to hit NATO at some point, and that would mean American troops would get involved, and I don't think that would mess around with American troops. To go to the Democratic Republic topic, I think the attacks on institutions like the Supreme Court and the Electoral College are not good.
You think the attacks on the Supreme Court on
Electoral College,
the electoral college?
because they, some politicians want to completely get rid of the Electoral College.
Well,
It's just popular.
to my knowledge, the Supreme Court hasn't touched that.
Correct. No, I mean like the separate issue of packing the court is another one.
All right, well, okay, you're getting us into some new areas. Can we move on a little bit from the Ukraine guys?
Yeah, I agree.
How about this idea? Do you understand, we don't elect the president by popular vote. Do you understand that? Through the electoral college. Each state has a number of in the electoral college equal to its number of representatives in the House plus its senators. But each state makes the rules itself as to how they vote. Some of them have to vote based on the plurality of the popular vote in the state. Some of them have pledged electors by party and so on and so forth. Now, that's becoming an issue. There are some people who definitely would like to get rid of the electoral college and go to pure popular vote by the majority, which would change the 3 or 4 different elections. So what are your thoughts and why?
I feel like we should move the electoral college with presidential election, make that be a popular vote seen as even be a representation of the entire people, but keeping the elections for Senate and state, Senate and representatives the same because they're meant to represent the local population and the local state.
Okay, they are elected by popular vote now. But you said, in other words, keep it the way it is.
I mean, as in not forming a system similar to how many countries in Europe have it, where let's say the Republicans won 51% of the national vote, they would get 51% of seats.
What did you just bring out? Where is it? I put it on here somewhere, I know. Parliamentary democracy. Maybe I didn't put it in there. Most of the democracies, non-authoritarian governments in the world are parliamentary democracies. You have, in the case of a number of them, just 2 parties like we do. But a lot of them, they have multiple parties. And you have to have a majority in the election of seats in order to form a government. So oftentimes you'll have 3 or 4 parties come together and they'll agree to form a government. In a parliamentary democracy, you don't have 3 separate forms of government like we do. You have the 2 houses, usually a lower house and an upper house, roughly similar to our House of Representatives and the Senate, and the winning party forms the government and appoints or elects a prime minister. It's a very different system. It gives it's quicker. You can get more done in a parliamentary democracy than you can in ours because the founding fathers wanted exactly that. They wanted these separations of power so that one group couldn't come in and just take over. But the other side of that coin is a parliamentary democracy is more efficient because the party in power can pretty well force through anything it wants, even if it has only a 1-vote majority in the parliament. Okay? Come.
I know that same efficiency logic could be applied to dictatorship or single party rule as well.
Applied to what?
That same efficiency argument applies to dictatorship, single party, or single party rule
yeah.
in general. Yes.
Did I start this by saying Churchill and a number of other well-known adherents of democracy have said democracy is a terrible form of government. It just happens to be the best one we've come up with so far. What's the most efficient form? Just what he said, a dictatorship. Whether that's a monarchy or a theocracy or a single dictator or a party that's in dictatorship, that's the most efficient form of government. They get something done. And if you like what the dictator's doing, it's just fine. Except if you don't, you got a problem. All right. What else? You guys are doing great. What's the difference between, well, what's capitalism?
Capitalism is where you can put some product up to a price that you want, and you can make money off of it, and you can become as rich as you want, depending on how many people buy your products. Compared to a locked economy, where they have a certain price on each item.
Okay, you got some of the elements in there. You've got also some elements of a free market. So let's talk about that for a minute. Capitalism simply means private capital. Private capital. Every business that gets started with private capital. That means it means it can be your own. It means that you can borrow it from other people, particularly in small startup businesses. Initially, it's your own capital. And then you get to what's called angels, people that have some funds, and if you can convince them that you have a good idea that will make money, they'll put up some money. And then eventually, if you have some track record of doing it fairly well, at least profitably, you get the bank to give you some money. Or you can even grow to the point where you're a public company, where you sell stock to the public. But the point is, it's private capital. It's not the government's capital. It's your decision to start this business, and you're using your own capital and other people's if you convince them to support you. The other kind of capital is in a demand economy, a managed economy, which is what most socialist systems have to be. And that's where the government decides. It can also be anybody. It can be theoretically the whole population decides where the money is put, etc. But I'm going to give you 2 examples. We'll go on. I know you got hands up. I want to show you something. 2 things. Oh, yeah. What is this? It's my wife's favorite new toy. It's a butter knife. It's got little perforations right along the side here. And you guys like your butter right out of the refrigerator, cold, but it's hard to spread, right? So you scrape this thing along and it goes through these little holes, and then you can put it on your bread, and then you can take the flat side and spread it out. I guarantee you will never find anything like this in a command economy. The government is not going to have the ability to make a decision, oh, that would be a profitable thing to make, but an entrepreneur can. Say, this could be, I don't know who did this, but let's just say it's a guy that had a tool and die shop. Maybe he's a small tool and die shop, he's got a couple of machines, he's making a decent living, and he's looking for things to do to increase his income. And he gets this idea for a butter knife. So he's already got the machine to make it. The only capital investment he has to make is maybe some material, and maybe he does a little advertising. Relatively limited amount. That ain't gonna happen in a command economy. Yesterday, I was down in the office, and they gave me one of these. Pencil, yeah, pen, ballpoint pen, got a compass on top, and if you flip the compass open, got a little flashlight. You've all seen something like this, you know. You ain't gonna find that in a command economy. I'll make one more comment about command economy. There is a marvelous article, it's called iPencil. If you want to know where to find it, I'll be happy to. It's famous, it's from the 1950s, but it's known to most economists.
Is that Milton Friedman?
Huh?
Is that Milton Friedman's?
No, it's not Milton. But the concept, the guy that wrote the article takes the creation of a pencil, all the way back from the wood that goes into the pencil, the graphite that goes into the pencil, the little band around the top of it, the so-called rubber, which isn't rubber, which causes abrasion, and traces every step of that and how many different people and companies and industries are involved in creating that pencil. Never happened in a command economy. Could not happen. They can copy what we already did, which is what China does a lot. But it wouldn't happen. It's just, and this is one of the simplest things we can think of. A pencil. Okay. I'm going too much on what I think on that. Other comments? What else? When you gave your explanation of capitalism, you got into free markets. Okay. A free market is what we have in this country. People say, well, that price that so-and-so is charging for that article is ridiculous. Okay. What controls the price that they charge?
The individual people.
Huh?
The individual people.
Who buys it? The individual people. The market controls. That's what a free market economy is. The price of anything is determined in the free market by the people. If they'll buy it and pay that, fine. If they don't, well, somebody can come along and compete with them. It takes some capital to do it. And compete with them and make it cheaper. If you know how to do it better, quicker, more efficiently, come along. You make a lot of money doing that. As opposed to in a command economy, we're going to have price set by some authority. Someone in the government's going to say, this will cost this much and this will cost that much.
It also depends on the amount of supply available. If there's a lot of supply available, the price won't be as high. But if there's just like a little bit of supply available, then everyone's going to be competing for that, and prices are just skyrocketing.
That's one of the first laws of economics. The law of price and demand. If the supply goes up, the price goes down. If it gets short, the price goes up.
Various tactics like planned obsolescence or stuff like that can be raised to lower prices.
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Various different tactics like planned obsolescence can raise or lower prices based on how you what do you do or how you do it.
Okay, what you're suggesting is can people try and manipulate price? Sure they can. Now, that's why legislative bodies make laws. And if something like that becomes abusive, and somebody's going to jump up and complain and make a law that you can't do that. But yes, there could be a attempt to do that. A lot of companies have been fined a lot of money when they have done things to try and manipulate the prices. I worked in the oil industry. One of the first things we ever heard when we came in the door, if we were involved in sales and marketing in any way, shape, or form, is if you're at an industry function like a convention or something, and if anybody mentions the word price, get up and leave, and on your way out the door, kick the table out over, so that everybody knows you left. Because that's one of the first things the government comes out with, price fixing. Where you competitors set the price together and say, oh, okay, I think it ought to be this, and it sounds kind of innocent. Well, you say that somewhere, oh, gee, I think so-and-so. I don't think they'll argue. If we raise the price, if we raise the price, we think they will. That's price fixing. Boy, that'll get you in trouble.
Yeah, price fixing is one of the things that warrants interventionism, which is something that I personally agree with to some extent. In terms of economics, I believe mostly in a free market system, yet still having some interventionism, basically to the degree of Theodore Roosevelt's economic policy under his administration.
Okay, you're suggesting that in a free market economy, there still needs to be some rules and regulations?
Yes.
I think almost everybody would agree with that. You have to have some rules and
To have a
regulations.
true free market.
We humans have a tendency to do what's good for us. So, carte blanche, do whatever you please. It's pretty shaky. Pretty shaky. What else you want to talk about? Sir?
About the gun ownership.
Huh?
Gun ownership.
Gun ownership. Let's see, we got some downstate people, and I'll just bet there's a difference of opinion. I would ask you, if we're going to talk about gun ownership, yes, no, some limits, and what are the limits? If you put the limits. Thank you, sir.
For gun ownership, I think there should be like some limitations on like more of a crackdown on like who they sell it to. I don't know if that's gonna be possible today, but that's what I think at least, because sometimes, so I know people need to defend themselves, and I agree with that, it's their right. But there's sometimes owners sell it to some people that are more questionable at best, and they're also notoriously known to be committing crimes. So if at least there could be some crackdown on it, which I don't know if it's gonna be at this case or like wide scale, but something like that.
What I understand you to say is you think gun ownership is a right, people should be able to, but there should be some limits as to who can own it.
Yeah.
All right, what are the limits? What limits would you propose?
Like something like, well, obviously like, I'm pretty sure, I'm not sure if this is already on there, like just certain crimes and all that, I'm pretty sure that's already there. But also more as to like, if they're like repeat offenders, even if for like small stuff, but if they're repeat offenders, you don't know if they're gonna escalate or not, so you may as well just cross them off the list. So only.
So if someone has a record of convictions
Yeah.
for some things, felonies maybe,
Yeah.
they should not be able to own a gun.
Yeah, like,
Okay,
and
something like
if you
that.
keep on repeating some of that behavior, then they 100% not hold
Okay,
on.
let's get some other thoughts. Ms. Wilson?
I agree that there should be like limits on, like you said, the people that should get the guns, not how many guns or what type of guns they get, like background checks or training programs before you're able to actually get a gun.
Do we have any precedent now that we limit
Background checks, I believe.
for what? Other than gun ownership? Do we have any precedent that we have requirements on?
Driving.
Driving? Voting? We have certain requirements. Do you want a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, or a 10-year-old to want to buy a gun? I don't. I'm a gun owner. And I would come down on the side of people the right to gun ownership. But I also believe strongly there has to be some sense about this. If someone is mentally deranged, and we're getting farther along in terms of psychologists being able to identify some certain psychology traits that raise some problems. That's a whole new area because we've also put most of the mentally deficient or questionable people out on the streets. We used to put them in an institution. And we struggle with how we deal with this. We struggle even more. Yeah. But certainly none of us want somebody who's wildly violent. All right, other thoughts?
I think it's important to have access to firearms because I think the misconception that most people have is the Second Amendment, meaning that right to bear arms to defend themselves. That is true to an extent, but it's actually made to defend ourselves from a tyrannical government if it comes to truth. And I think that's such an ingenious and important factor that our founding fathers have made because they themselves are under a tyrannical government. They saw how terrible lifestyle they were living, how soldiers could just sleep in their homes, paper-wide, either food and need, taxation could happen. If something like that were to happen, America itself would cease to exist in terms of being a democracy.
No problem. Democratic Republic, close enough. Most people refer to it as it. Now, I'm not sure exactly what you were saying. Are you saying
Access to firearms is essential.
they should, okay, access to firearms is essential. Okay, and that particular, the Second Amendment thing, the wording in particular, the Supreme Court has gone nuts trying to figure out what that wording actually means. Let's get over here. Would you? Yes.
I was gonna say, yes, we should, I agree with, we should have gun ownerships. I'm thinking that the limits that we already have in place are well enough established, considering the background checks and a lot of the, because like a lot of times when you are a appeal companies, that type of stuff, it is a very, very difficult process to ready to own one legally. So that, I'm saying that we should have some limits on stuff.
Okay, some limits.
But I was gonna also say that a lot of, when they talk about gun violence, it's one of those things in which it's a very rare case. Just what you know, there's a higher chance of you actually getting stabbed than you actually getting shot.
Okay. All right.
I believe in gun ownership, but I think a lot of our problems come from like misinformation and malteaching. And the main way to fix that is starting to teach younger generations how to gun safety about things.
Some of it is just misinformation and misunderstanding. I'll give you an example. This is my wife. When I got a permit to carry 10 years ago, well, my wife went nuts. She says, "You can't have a gun in this house. We have grandchildren." I said, "What about the shotgun and the rifle I had when our kids were growing up?" "Oh, well, today my wife has a pistol of her own. She doesn't have a permanent carry. She has a pistol of her own, and she goes to the gun range. She can take it apart herself. She knows how to clean it. Before I ever let her touch one, I made her go through a lot of gun safety. But also, in spite of that, she will say, well, one of the things we should do about gun ownership is we should prohibit assault weapons." You heard that one? You all heard that one, right? What's an assault weapon? That's what I asked you. What's an assault weapon? And usually, if people say an assault weapon is one that
It's the age.
down here and back here, and maybe some sights up here. It's an assault weapon. What is it? I think what people really mean is what we should prohibit is automatic weapons. In other words, you pull the trigger and it doesn't stop shooting until you quit pulling the trigger. By the way, they're already banned.
Well, technically.
So that's just people's understanding of what are we really talking about. It's a great thing to come back to this deal. Critical thinking on the issue. Do we have a chance of ever resolving this gun issue? I think so, but I think it's going to be difficult, and it's going to require people to actually do some critical thinking. It's going to require people to have some honest conversations, not just come in and say, I demand the right to have a gun in any circumstances, no matter what. The government can't tell me I can't have a gun. On the other hand, nobody should have a gun under any circumstances. We got to get by that and start talking.
I would say, yes, it's fine to own a gun. I have, at my family has several. Purposes varying. But I do believe that one of the big limits that more states, and I'm pretty sure Illinois has, proposes a waiting period.
Yeah, a waiting period before you can drive. And what's the purpose of a waiting period?
A waiting period is because, so for example, let's say an ex-husband walks into a gun store and goes, yeah, I'd like to buy a 9mm.
Yeah, so there's a waiting period. Let's say it's a week.
Yeah.
What's that do? What do you want to do during a waiting period?
Well, in that week, he's had time to cool down. He starts thinking, maybe I don't really need this. It's just so no one buys a gun the same day, walks out with it, gets angry over someone and shoots a gun in the street.
How about some time to do some investigation to see if there's any reason that person shouldn't own a gun? Now we're back to, okay, what are the reasons why we would want to prohibit? We've said, we have driver's licenses, we have to register to vote, we limit things, we don't have unlimited freedoms. So on this, on guns, we need some limits. Seems to be what most people tend to agree on. And the problem is, what are those limits? Okay, let's get some more wood here.
Yeah, I really like that about reasons. At the end of the day, a gun is a gun, and it's all about the person that's using the gun. Yeah, and you know, if you think just taking a gun away, that won't do much in certain situations. Like if there's a school shooting, usually the gun is stolen. Like a kid can't go and buy a gun. Like if you look at certain school shootings that are reported in the media, it's always them stealing a gun from a relative, stealing a gun from someone that they know. Like it's almost always an illegal firearm. Like all the media points at this stuff to say this is bad, this is why we need to ban guns. Those are illegal guns. Like they weren't even legal in the first place.
Okay, I would be
Yeah.
careful, I'd recommend be careful of using all-encompassing word like always, etc.
Yes.
I think I saw about 3 hands go up when they heard that.
Yeah.
I do agree, yes, since the Columbine shooting, more people have been doing it, and you can see a track record of like mentally disabled or mentally gone people have been getting in and wanting more attention, so they've been shooting up schools, killing people. And all the most, if not almost all the guns that they received or got came in through backdoor ways, so they got like guns backdoored. So mostly gun laws restrict the free and the rule followers. The non-rule followers do not go that way. They go backdoor, take, or whatever.
Yeah.
The government will try its best to stop the.
And there's so much difference between local laws and state laws on what you, one of the problems, if you are, and I'll tell you this, because I used to travel to Mississippi, Gulf Coast, Mississippi, where I have a daughter, and to New York, where I have a son and his family. I could take my pistol with me in the car, loaded, on a trip to Biloxi, Mississippi. And I wasn't going to violate anybody's state laws. I had a permit to carry it, I was trained to carry it. I couldn't do that if I went to New York. And if I did it, and I got off the turnpike or the expressway in some states, and happened to get a ticket, I could be, if the officer saw that I had a gun, I could be in real deep trouble, much more than a speeding ticket, because of different laws in different states. That's a problem.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, also the states who have like more strict gun laws have the more like gun violence.
Yeah.
So it's
Your point is true. Statistically, the states with the most gun violence have the most restrictive rules. Now, again, that's kind of an oversimplification. You need to think about that. Chicago will bark about this all the time. Illinois will bark about it all the time. It said there's so much gun violence, and it's coming in from Indiana, where it's much easier to buy a gun. In Illinois, it's much harder to buy a gun, particularly in Chicago. There is a point there. It is true. And what happens is people with like poor morals or no inhibitions will buy a gun in Indiana and go out and sell it in Chicago it becomes a street gun. How do you deal with that one? That's tough. None of us want kids to get shot in schools, and a lot of us don't want to totally take away the right to have a gun. So I think they're difficult, but I love the way you guys are thinking about these things. And you're the future. You're our future. You're going to be voting. You're going to be our representatives, our statesmen, our politicians, and you're thinking about it. Yeah.
I think it would actually be really hard to, like you said, limit buying weapons, because not only can people make, not only can they take them from other states and bring it into the current state you're in. There's new things coming out called ghost guns or 3D printed guns.
of plastic and they make the shell of a gun that only needs a couple of metal pieces and then it is completed and works just like normal.
Okay, you're pointing out some of the difficulties. Well,
And really, what we should be thinking about more is less of the guns themselves, what are people doing them. Because if this is a phenomenon that could have happened in the 50s theoretically, the only difference is that, not the guns, the people. Why couldn't have this have happened back in the day? What is different about the people doing it?
yeah, it's a popular saying among gun owners, guns don't kill people, people do. I've never seen a gun kill anybody on its own. Lay on the counter, I put a loaded gun here with the safety off, it ain't gonna kill anybody. Till somebody picks it up, maybe because they don't know a doggone thing about guns, and they start playing around with it, and pretty soon it goes off and it kills somebody. Or maybe they get mad and they wanna pick it up and shoot somebody. But the gun ain't gonna kill it. It's people. And eventually, I think that's the area we're gonna have to focus on, is to try and address the gun control problem, the gun violence problem. And it's tough. That's very tough. Yes, sir.
I think that, you know, when a gun is not on on you, it should be like locked away in like a safe or something, just because, you know, there's many stories about relatives getting a hold of the gun, and it's just, you know, there are many statistics that show that something as simple as like suicide rates, when using a gun, it is drastically more effective as almost any other means of suicide. So it's just, you have those background checks for you, but you don't have background checks for the people around you in the household. So just always keeping it in a safe place.
His major point is, if it isn't on your person or available for certain use, it ought to be locked up. And that's one of the first things that's taught in good gun safety class, particularly if you have kids in the house. Don't leave the gun where they can get to it. Even just don't where they can get to it. There was another.
Kind of like what you were saying about how guns doesn't kill somebody. I think our main way of trying to fix that, like I was saying earlier, is teaching the younger generation about guns. Whether that's having a police officer come to their school for a day, giving gun training class, something that gets the younger generation to understand the power of
Yeah. Do any of you have school safety officers, police in your schools? Yeah, some of you do. The first time I heard that, I hated that idea. I said, good God, what does it come to when we gotta have a police officer in the school? And then in a couple schools where I teach on our talk on Memorial Day or Veterans Day, had officers. And in Naperville, they have officers. And I became associated with a group and learned about that. And I think it's wonderful. First of all, it's great because the kids develop a relationship with the police officer then, that it's not some bad person that's out there to try and take away their rights or hurt them. And secondly, they learn things. Yes.
Also for my school, we have instead of having the regular firearms, also having the regular firearm, we also have 2 different new alarms, where it's like fire alarm, where it pulls down and it calls police and emergency services. And we are also doing like the Atlas thing too, as of recently, with like barricading and stuff.
We got about 5 minutes, guys. Anything else you want to talk about we haven't touched on here?
I'm thinking maybe the Constitution or something.
The Constitution?
Yeah, more.
Hey, you know what? You made me think of something, and you come up with something else, jump right in there. But that's the major difference in our form of government. We have the Constitution, which is the Bill of Rights, is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. If you have the Constitution, we have the Declaration of Independence. We're not going to get into Articles of Confederation before that. But we have the legislative branch, a judicial branch, and an administrative branch. This is what makes a republic far different, and it what makes our republic so much better than the alternatives out there. In our Constitution, you have these declared rights of the people. You're going to have a Constitution that doesn't include that. Now, we can argue that, has everybody always been, have those rights always been administered equally to citizens? But it's what we have, we still have the government, the system that says it must be that way. And there's always the system that can come and correct. It's individual people that violate the system. So that's the beauty of our government.
I want to float one idea. I think every American should have to take the citizenship test.
Oh, boy.
Like,
Do I agree with you? Hey, look, that's kind of my government. Naturalized citizens, people that come in here and to vote, have to study to become citizens. And they have to take a test to pass them. Maybe, I personally, if I go back to this voting age, I know people that are mature enough and informed enough to vote at 16, and I'd be very happy with it. I know people at 50 that I wish they didn't vote, because they don't know what they're doing. So why can't we require on something as important as voting? Why can't we require some kind of base requirement? I suggest that if we got our best and brightest people, we could come up with a formula that's not restrictive, it's not bigoted or biased, but it would help maybe address the gun problem and lead to better voting patterns and more participation.
I agree with what he said about like the citizenship test and what you said, because I see like many adults like not even know some of the president's names or like the basic things an American should, while many younger people know way much more about it.
Well, I just take you guys as a group.
Yeah.
I'll guarantee you already, you wouldn't be here if you were something, unless you were someone accomplished in your school. I guarantee you, this group of guys right in here, I'd rather have you vote than a whole bunch of people that I know.
I want to add on top of that. I don't think that's more of like a general. I think that stems from a problem of like schooling and stuff like that. So like a lot of American schools through previous like acts where they get paid more for how well they do or how bad they do. Schools get funded. And so they really prioritize math and sciences and like really the core subjects. And they leave a few things like the arts and history in the dust.
Okay. All right. Well, you make the point, really. What people think is important is funding. And now we go back to, in this country, you can have some input on that. Maybe the government says this is the way it's going to be. You can say, wait a minute, government, I don't like that. And you can go protest to the school board. And you can run for office. You can make a difference. I said, you there.
So for the citizen test, voting, I think that one of the questions should be what are your first five, what are your first amendment rights?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, some questions like that. Some basic, I will tell you guys, there's been lots of arguments about voting rights, and it's been portrayed that this group of people wants to take away or limit voting rights, and this people wants to give them to everybody. What the founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson being the biggest proponent, said, a democracy cannot continue to exist unless we have an informed voting public. Now, the interpretation of that in 1790 was landowners, because we were an agrarian economy, and it basically the people that owned land and farmed were the ones that knew the issues. Now, the first big change we made in that was women's suffrage. In 1910 or 15, women weren't allowed to vote before that, because it was deemed they live in the home, they work in the home, they're not really involved with the questions that should be decided. And we've come much further than that. But it's an interesting topic. Some kind of a requirement for voting. All right, guys, it's been great. We're done. I thank you so much for